mic, you guys. Oh my goodness. I forgot my boom. I'm sorry. Well, you just got a little behind the scenes preview there. Hi, everybody. I have these moments where in the middle of all of this, there are things that kind of remind me of the moments before the French Revolution. And today is one of those days. Like yesterday was also one of those days where I have these moments where I look at what the administration is doing and it just smacks of the imminent fall of empire. Okay, so we have to talk about what happened yesterday in terms of the announcement of the White House about a new addition that they're putting onto the building and how much it's going to cost and what it signifies. And while I have been here for many, many years now saying that the GOP and the MAGA movement is essentially immune to hypocrisy, we kind of have hit a new low on that front, I think, in the last 24 hours. So we've got that and a lot more to talk about on Epstein and on Kamala Harris and on a whole bunch of other things. So welcome. If it's your first time here, my name is Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer. I also run a company called the Gaia Leadership Project, which works to help people create the impact that they're here to make for good. We do a lot of work with nonprofit leaders and movement builders and community organizers and lots of folks who in other forums are trying to kind of create massive generational change right now. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a gray V-neck sweater. It's a lot colder here than it was yesterday. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I am in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. So yesterday, okay, let's back up for a minute, actually, because I got to put this in historical context. Okay. It was not that long ago. The Doge, with all those bros, with all their foul nicknames, took over the government at the hands of Elon Musk under the banner of cutting waste. Okay. Now we all know that in the long run, notwithstanding everything they cut, they actually ended up costing the government a lot more money. But this thing of like drain the swamp and, cut the waste in government has been a theme of this administration, both in the first cohort of it and in the second. So yesterday, after all of this nonsense, the White House announced that they are putting on a $200 million addition to the White House in the form of a gaudy, trashy, gold-plated ballroom. And I just have to say that on top of this, they're doing this after the murder budget has passed, where the whole theme of the murder budget is that we have to cut Medicaid and we have to cut food stamps and we have to cut Medicare and we have to cut all these other social safety net benefits because there's so much waste in the federal government. Okay. And now they're doing this. I'm also going to point out that the $200 million that they're using to put this ballroom on is an equivalent amount to the settlement that Harvard University agreed to pay earlier this week to the Trump administration for something. Nobody really knows what. And while it's clear that the money is not like a direct line to the ballroom, I think there's a little bit of a rich irony in the fact that they have extorted, at this point, hundreds of millions of dollars out of major universities. They have cut hundreds of millions of dollars in grants. They have terminated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands at this point, of federal workers from their jobs. They've slashed the social safety net. This morning's jobs report was terrible. The economy is showing dramatic signs of weakening. And so what are they doing? They're building a kind of shit version of Versailles onto the side of the White House to the tune of $200 million. I mean, honestly, it's a little much to take. And also, it's kind of a sign of where we are, right? Because I will just remind you all that, in the waning days of monarchy in France, Marie Antoinette, although there's a lot of debate about whether or not she actually said this and whether or not she was actually kind of like blamed for stuff that her husband, King Louis, was doing, was reported to have said about starving peasants gathering at the gate of the palace, let them eat cake, right? Which, by the way, as it was a rallying cry of the French Revolution, the busting through the doors of the Bastille prison and the releasing of political prisoners, setting fire to buildings in Paris, and eventually to the execution of Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette by guillotine, okay? So there's a whole trajectory in this. Nonetheless, this sheer, overarching, obscene wealth in the hands of the few, with those folks in power saying, we're going to do this while telling you that you don't deserve to have health care, or you don't deserve to be able to feed your family, or you don't deserve to be able to, tap into the things that you've been paying into your entire life, is really hard to take. Okay. And, one of the things that I just want people to be aware of here is that it's not like this isn't lost on people, right? Yes, there will be people in the cult who will be like, oh yeah, sure. That gaudy, plastic stick-on sconce that he's got in the Oval Office sure looks great to me, even though you can download it off of Amazon for $25, right? There will be people that will be like, oh yeah, all hail President Trump, right? But there's going to be a lot of other people, especially as these cuts become more and more apparent. We see rural hospitals closing. People can't access the medical care that they need. Jobs get lost. The food supply chain starts drying up because he's deporting everybody who works in the fields. I'm just going to say this. This is the kind of thing that makes people angry enough to create revolutions. So, we'll have to see what happens with this. But it definitely is kind of a moment of holy crap. Really? Really? I mean, you had to cut US aid. 3 million deaths attributable to that worldwide. But you get to do this? Okay. These are things that people do not forget. And part of our job, by the way, as people who care, is to keep reminding everyone of it. All right. We have to talk for a second about Kamala Harris, who I still love, because she announced yesterday that she's not going to run for the governor of California. I actually didn't expect her to do this. This didn't come as a huge surprise to me. She's been through a lot. And honestly, running for the governorship of California just never really made sense to me as a next step for her. I know there was a lot of call for her to do it, right? She's much beloved in California. She was a great senator from California. I was there through her term, deeply respected and adored. But nonetheless, it just didn't make sense to me. I couldn't see the trajectory of her being the governor of California. And so she's announced she's not going to do it. But more significantly, she gave an interview on Stephen Colbert last night. And I did not have an opportunity to watch all of it, but I watched most of it. And in the course of that interview, she talked about her historical view on being a public servant. And that, as she had discussed with her mother and with others, that there's an importance in banging down the door, kicking down the door to have a seat at the table. That, by the way, is a very familiar expression from Shirley Chisholm and others, right? First Black woman to run for president. And essentially what it attaches to is the idea that we need to have the right people working inside the system to create change. And essentially the message from Kamala Harris's interview last night on Colbert is that the system is so broken right now that she's not sure that working inside the system actually makes sense. And I have to say that while it's very easy to watch that and be sad, I also think that it's a real moment of honesty about where we are. And frankly, much like Stacey Abrams, and much like many other folks who have run for office and lost, right? I prefer sometimes to see those powerful folks working outside the system to mobilize and organize others. Beto O'Rourke is another great example of this, right? In his powered by the people movement in Texas, he's been able to mobilize millions of people to vote and get people registered to vote that never otherwise would have been able to. And even though he lost several races, nonetheless, the work that he continues to do in Texas is really important. So I will just say that I'm not terribly bothered by this decision. I do understand why people are still grief-stricken and why the interview probably kicked up some stuff for a lot of folks. All that said, I'm really interested to see what she does next, because there's, her polling numbers remain extremely high among Gen Z. I do not think that she will run for the presidency in 2028. I would be shocked to see that, frankly. But I have no question that whatever it is that she decides she's doing next is going to be very significant. So That is that. Okay. We had a question on the Patreon feed this morning. Reminder, if you become a paid subscriber over at Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you get to ask me questions that I will answer on the broadcast or in writing. Today, we had a question about how sanctuary cities work. Okay. So this is actually not an easy question to answer because the idea of a sanctuary city is very common, which is that, immigrants are safe in a certain location, but how that is carried out location to location differs greatly. Okay. So for instance, here where I live, there's a push right now to pass a statewide law that would essentially stop local action to report people to ICE, right? It would create anti-discrimination laws against undocumented people and a variety of other things. And there's a huge push in the major statewide immigration rights coalition to get that bill passed. All right. That would essentially make New Jersey a sanctuary state. Okay. But in other cities, sometimes it's we're not going to cooperate with ICE. Sometimes it's, we're going to welcome people and make sure that people have housing and food, right? New York City, by the way, took over a whole hotel for a chunk of time in the last few years to use as a processing center for new immigrants entering the city. There's various ways in which what we refer to as sanctuary cities is played out. Okay. Sometimes it's through the law. Sometimes it's through policy. Sometimes it's simply through a statement by a mayor about how the policy is going to flow from there. All right. So of course, sanctuary cities and states have been targeted by the Trump regime. And this is not new, by the way. I will remind you all that he is historically, including in the middle of the COVID pandemic, withheld resources or put targets otherwise on cities where he felt like people didn't support him. Okay. This is why blue states didn't get PPE when red states did, right? He enacts revenge against cities that he feels are acting in defiance of him. And so none of that is unusual. And essentially the answer to this, if you are curious about how it works where you live, is to, first of all, get involved with the local immigration rights coalition, which can inform you about all of it. But second of all, to stay very, very attuned to local and state legislation, because there's a lot of room right now for activism and mobilization around various policies to protect immigrants. And we all need to know what those are where we live. Like, the town that I live in here, just outside of New York City, is a sanctuary town, like has passed whole ordinances. I mean, and granted, I live in the state that has the second highest per capita of immigrants in the nation, but they've taken affirmative actions to protect immigrants here from ICE. This includes, by the way, all the way down to individual schools, where the principals have, for instance, empowered the staff of their schools to not open the doors to anyone without prior approval of the principal, and to educate students about what could happen if ICE comes to the school with and without a warrant. Scary for the kids. Sometimes they've handled it in a very age-appropriate way, but there are lots of places that are taking proactive action to make sure that immigrants, and particularly immigrant kids, are safe. All right. So that's kind of a broad understanding of what that does. Okay. We had a question following up on what I discussed yesterday about gerrymandering. Yesterday's whole broadcast was about whether or not Democrats should gerrymander in the same way that Republicans do to assure that Democrats can get into power and maintain it. Please go watch that broadcast if you haven't yet. But somebody asked a follow-up question this morning, which was essentially about, can voter turnout overcome gerrymandering? So gerrymandering is designed so that voter turnout is irrelevant, okay? Essentially what they are trying to do when they're doing it on the basis of party is to engineer districts that are so Republican dominant and to redline, I'm using that that word intentionally, redline Democrats into one small location or into buckled locations where, they get one elected and all the other gerrymandered locations really only have the potential of electing Republicans. Prime example of this is Matt Gaetz's old district in Florida, the Florida First. That district is so gerrymandered that it is essentially impossible for a Democrat to get elected there because most of the voting base on the way that they've designed this tiny little strip along the Florida Panhandle is registered Republicans, and they have intentionally gerrymandered it block by block. Okay. So while voter turnout usually favors Democrats, the aim of party-based gerrymandering is, again, to make it impossible, no matter what voter turnout exists, for Democrats to win. Now, does that mean it's impossible? No, in part because, like on a routine basis, huge percentages of the US population don't turn out to vote. And in some of these gerrymandered districts, if all the Democrats turned out to vote, there's a possibility that maybe a Democrat could get elected. But that's an uphill battle, right? Because the other thing that happens with gerrymandering in many of these locations is that because the district is so gerrymandered, Democrats living in those districts think that there's no point in voting to begin with. So it's an uphill battle. And it's really important that, from the perspective of how we mobilize, we're taking care of policy and we're working on voter suppression in our states, like fighting against gerrymandering, fighting against the policies that prohibit, feeding people when they're waiting in line, or, bringing a chair if you're going to wait in line for 12 hours. All these things are things that we very much need to be mindful of locally. And this is yet again another reason, I will just say it again, why you have to get involved where you live in what's happening at your city council, in your county council, and in your state, okay? Really important to know what kind of ordinances are being passed, and also to be aware that when state legislatures undertake gerrymandering, that's not necessarily a done deal. There's often a lot of protests. People show up at state legislative houses, and then there can be challenges in court, okay? So all of this fits together. And this is one reason, I'm going to say it again, why simply waiting to mobilize for elections is a failing strategy, okay? So much of the determination of elections is pre-written on the basis of things like gerrymandering and voter suppression laws. So you have to get involved where you live. All right. Okay. There was some breaking news this morning on the Epstein files. I'm so sick of talking about this thing, but we have to keep talking about it because every time I talk about it, I get like nauseous. This morning, there was some breaking news that the FBI had blacked out Trump's name in the Epstein files before the final decision was made by Pam Bondi to not release the files at all. Again, this is not, there's a lot of noise about this morning on Blue Sky and elsewhere. And I will just say that I'm not surprised by this. We already knew he was in the files. Allison Gill has been reporting on this quite extensively, among many others, that which is then confirmed by the New York Times, that in fact, we know that Trump's name is in the files. And the FBI was redacting the files of the names of prominent persons, which included Donald Trump, to prepare those files for release, okay? I will say that redaction of litigation files is very, very normal to protect people's identities if they have not yet been indicted, okay? So again, there are things called protective orders put in place in civil litigation and in criminal litigation that can protect the identities of people who are not accused of crimes. There's no such protective order in place in relation to this. All these files could be released in an unredacted format. I personally think that protecting the victims should matter. But, the only reason for blacking out the names of the people who participated in it is to not have them associated with like what is currently the world's most notorious sex trafficking ring. Not really a legitimate basis, in my opinion, to black out their identities. But again, this is not something new. It's not something shocking, at this point, because we already know he's in there. And that's the whole reason why this cover up is ongoing now for about a month, right? Like we're coming up on a month now from the date that Bondi announced that she wasn't, everybody who says this isn't going to stick, we're still talking about it 5 days a week. So, we shall see. Okay, I have to say a couple of things here because periodically on the Patreon feed and elsewhere, I get a swath of questions out of left field that are not from reliable sources. So this is my moment where I just have to say something about this, okay? So for instance, there's one account on X right now that is claiming that there is a police officer in Florida who has 246 tapes of Epstein raping girls, okay? The only place that this is being reported is on an account on X. And I have to remind you all, actually, maybe you don't even know this. 2 days ago, there was an announcement that something like 80% of the traffic on X right now is bots. Like, that platform is not reliable. Even if it looks like it's coming from a named account, there's so many instances of people getting hacked, of traffic being amplified from like people who are really not reliable actors, that you should not be getting any of your information at all off that platform for any reason. Like, why are you still on it? It's a Nazi bar, right? It's like going into a neo-Nazi drinking party and expecting that you're going to get reliable information about what's happening in the nation. Like, stop. There's nothing reliable about that platform at all. The other thing that I have to say to others is this, okay? Anybody can start a Substack. Okay, anybody can start a Substack. And while Substack has also this week been sending out push notifications with actual swastikas on them because they platform Nazis, one of the things that you should be aware of is that just because someone writes something on a Substack and claims to have some authority about the thing that they're talking about doesn't actually make it true, okay? So one of the things that I'm seeing lately is that people will take as the word of God, so to speak, an allegation in a Substack post that Kamala won the 2024 election. Okay, if you see something like this, first of all, I ask you to put on your critical thinking hat and ask yourself whether it's really worth your time, because I'm going to tell you right now, the 2024 election is not going to be overturned. That ship has sailed. The place that we should all be focusing our attention right now is how to alleviate the harm that is being done by this administration, and being distracted by that bullshit, frankly, is going to keep you from doing the work that we need to do to save people's lives right now. Okay, that's my opinion on all that. But in addition to that, if you see something like that and you decide that it might be worth your time to pursue it, I would strongly encourage you to dive deep into who the person is, what their claimed authority is, where they're getting their information, whether that information and data is reliable. Huge question marks, right? What's the reputation of this person? Is there anybody with a legitimate reputation who claims them as reliable, right? Or have they been fired from a mainstream news source because they're reporting as shit, right? You have to think through all this stuff, all right? And today in particular, there were a whole series of questions where I was just like, damn, like people are seeing a single post or a crazy Substack and thinking that it's true. And that's really not good. That's how we fall for propaganda and disinformation, how we get distracted, how we stop doing the really important work of mobilizing in our own communities. Like every minute that you spend on that nonsense is a minute that you could be doing good for somebody else. So this is kind of like your wake-up call, if you need one, to not take everything at face value, to please think critically about what you're reading, to ask yourself, like, is this in my best interest to pursue? Or am I being distracted by something that is a dead end, right? That goes nowhere, right? And also to make sure that you're back checking like who people are. Because I'll just say one other thing. There are some sources on Substack that have very large followings proportionally, maybe not. I mean, I think I have, I'm in the 20,000s now of subscribers and followers, maybe not as significant as that, but let's say 5 figures, right? Who routinely publish completely unreliable things, like absolute contradictory facts. And when I see people doing this, and some of this stuff gets legal and I get really annoyed because I'm like, that person is talking out of their ass. They have no idea what they're talking about when they're saying that like the law works this way. Like that's somebody who just like doesn't have a law degree or hasn't done their research or really doesn't understand the nature of how law gets applied. It drives me crazy, right? So again, just please be cautious about where you're getting your information. And the other thing that I'm just going to say here about this, because I have to do another reminder of this. This is like the 4th time I've had to do this week. Okay. Stop demanding videotapes of individuals raping children. Stop. Okay. Stop. We don't need those. There are files inside the Department of Justice that could be released today that have everything that we would need to determine Donald Trump's role in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Okay. We do not need to see video evidence of illegal child sexual material. We don't need it. And the damage that it would do to the victims, right, is unspeakable. So, again, I want people to like check themselves. Okay. Like, I've seen posts on Blue Sky and elsewhere, which are like, well, maybe this allegation that these 246 tapes exist isn't really reliable, but fingers crossed it is. I will just say if I have a preference between hoping that videotapes of child rape exist and not? I'm going to hope they don't. I'm going to hope they don't. Okay? Because what I think about is those girls. And I frankly get like really disgusted with the lack of self-awareness of people who are salaciously demanding things like that or want things like that to exist. Why would you want something like that to exist? Right? Why would you hope that those tapes exist? It's kind of like sick stuff, right? Everybody get that? So, from the place of where we sit in relation to the consumption of information right now. Oh, I'll give another example of this. Somebody this morning asked a question about like, what if Trump dropped a dime on Epstein? That makes a lot of sense about why he is where he is. Critical thinking cap. You think Donald Trump called the police on Jeffrey Epstein? Really? Really? I don't know where that speculation is coming from on the internet. I couldn't track it down. I did some research to figure it out. There's a few people talking about it this morning. I'm just going to tell you this, okay? Donald Trump is a rapist, like an adjudicated rapist, accused multiple times by ex-wives and something like 26 women of sexual assault, not convicted, but adjudicated of having sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll. Convicted of 34 felony counts of what smells an awful lot like sexual assault by manipulation of Stormy Daniels. You think he dropped a dime on Jeffrey Epstein? Give me a freaking break. Okay? Like, it's this kind of stuff that makes me like nuts, right? Because the fact of the matter is that the facts are plain as day, right? We don't need anything else except the FBI files. And the facts are this, okay? They were best friends for 15 years. There are multiple allegations from Epstein's victims that they saw Trump, that they saw them together, that they negotiated over who was going to get access to 16-year-old victims, that Trump was on his plane, that Epstein was at his wedding to Marla Maples, right? That, their dispute, their falling out was over Jeffrey Epstein, as Donald Trump put it earlier this week, stealing Virginia Giuffre from Donald Trump like she's property. Do we have any indication anywhere that Donald Trump would object to Jeffrey Epstein engaging in sex trafficking of teenage girls? No. Okay. So again, you have to think, like truly you have to think. And I know it's hard sometimes because people fall down rabbit holes and the internet is designed to do this to people. Okay. You have to think about like, not just whether or not something is true or false or who benefits when you see information like this, right? Like, wouldn't it be convenient for Donald Trump if there was a narrative out there on the internet that he's actually the person who reported Jeffrey Epstein to law enforcement? Come on, right? You have to think about who benefits if the narrative is true. But more than that, you have to be ethical in the way you think about this entire situation. You should be putting in all of your thinking about it and all of your advocacy the victims and their trauma first, okay? And again, I'll just say this. One of the things about this entire situation that has been really hard for me to swallow is how many women are out there demanding to see evidence of child rape. I don't get it. Like, I get it from white men who may not understand it, or white men who may be like complicit, or even white men on the left who are like, oh, I want to see whether or not that's actually true because they're kind of gross, right? What I don't get is, when we know that 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted or raped before the age of 18, what I don't get is why women don't think about what this means to those victims if those videotapes exist. And we know, by the way, that, 11,000 items classified as illicit child sexual assault material were seized from Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse. So there's videotape and photographic evidence already. I have no desire to see it. You shouldn't either. Okay. So that's my little rant today. All right. How can I help you develop your critical thinking skills? Somebody's asking that in the chat. Okay. So this is why I got an entire college education in things like critical theory. All right. I'll just say this, okay? You should always be asking questions, especially in this environment, which is so rife with disinformation and propaganda, about who's writing it, whether or not they're reliable, where the initial information is sourced from, who benefits if it's true, and whether or not it is truly in your best interest to be amplifying it. Like, the number of times that I have seen people not do those things and then amplify false information, if I had a nickel for any one of those times, I wouldn't be here. I'd be like long retired with like millions of dollars in the bank. Okay. People have to pause, like really stop and think when you see information that is in any way triggering to you emotionally, right? Because again, reminder here, social media is driven on engagement. And the reason why people put out false information is because it drives engagement. In fact, the far right is really good at doing this in ways that trigger people on the left because they need our reach to get their false information out into the world. And we repost it like, isn't this horrible? But it gets to people, right? So again, it's incredibly important that you think when you read something that causes an emotional reaction, makes you angry, makes you sad, makes you disgusted, makes you like giddy at the possibility of revenge. You have to ask yourself whether or not it's true, who's written it, for what purpose, who wins if it's true, whether or not it's ethical to share it, whether or not from a moral or strategic standpoint, you need to share it, right? And then also on top of it, you can layer on political strategy. Is it a good idea for this information to be true, right? And of course, in situations involving sexual assault and other crimes that are like deeply traumatic, or the persecution of people, or, even the reports about the things that have been happening at CCOT, very hard to read. You have to think about, like, are you re-traumatizing people by sharing this stuff? Because the victims have already said, the victims that are known have been giving interviews in the last week about how re-traumatizing it is for them to have people running around out there demanding to see pictures and videos because they don't even know whether or not they're in the materials that were seized. Can you imagine? Can you imagine now being like a 40-year-old person, not knowing if your rape was recorded and seeing masses of people around America demanding to see it? Ugh. I can't. Sorry, I need to get off this topic because this is really upsetting to me. It's really upsetting to me to see people like just absolutely lacking any kind of self-reflection about the impact that they're having with their words. Okay. We had a question on the Patreon feed, final topic for today, about the following. I talked yesterday, again, on the issue of redistricting about the importance of Democrats fighting fire with fire. Okay. And the question that was asked was related, I guess, in a way, sort of like maybe a tangent off that topic, which is, what about an eye for an eye making everybody blind? Okay, so that is actually, in my mind, a different moral code. And I'm just going to say this, okay? There is a difference between saying, because you are perpetrating mass violence on my people, I am going to perpetrate mass violence on you, okay? That is where that lesson from a parable, an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind, comes from, okay? That is very different, in my view, from seeing anti-democratic processes underway and saying, we're going to take the high road and say, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. Rather than engaging in strategies that effectively cancel out what's happening over here, okay? And again, one of the things that I have to point out here is that there is a lot of recalcitrance. I don't know what it is, like inability to take action in the Democratic Party leadership right now. That's really gross, and kind of like hard to understand, because what we need right now is an opposition party, right? We need people, and there's some, don't get me wrong, right? Jasmine Crockett, right? Chris Van Hollen. We have people who have stood up and actually put their actions behind their words, unlike some people who give 25-hour speeches on the floor of the Senate and then vote for Trump's nominees. We have some people who are really committed to like doing the work of opposition, right? But the vast majority of the Democratic Party either hasn't gotten it yet, or for some reason has decided to act as if they're powerless. And they're not, right? So if there is a capacity to radically gerrymander California to create more Democratic seats in response to Texas redistricting to create more red seats than ever, the Democrats should do that. Because what's going to happen if they don't is that, like, democracy falls apart forever. So, this is a moment where we have to understand that the playing field has changed. And that doesn't mean that, like, I see crazy things on the internet all the time. I'm not talking about saying, like, oh, we're going to round up Republicans when this is all over and put them in concentration camps. No. And in fact, it drives me completely crazy when people say this Republican should be deported. No. Why would you wish deportation and, incarceration in a third party country on anyone? In that instance, you have lost your moral center. Okay. But when we're talking about political strategy to fight fire with fire, to try to preserve democracy and maybe rebuild this country from the ashes, like, I'm all in favor of that shit. I think Democrats have to go hard right now, but I think they can do it, and we should do it from a place that maintains a moral standard. And in fact, using the policies that are available to us, using Robert's Rules of Order, using these archaic rules that exist in the House and the Senate to shut down what the Republicans are doing. Like, Mitch McConnell did that stuff for years. Why would we not do it? Those are loopholes and options that are as available to us, right? It's a moment to recognize that, like, a lot of the way our government functioned for a long time was on the assumption that people would follow the rules, when the Republicans never really did, right? Like, we all can understand that all of this dates back to Ronald Reagan, right? Like, pretty much. We have to be prepared from a strategic standpoint to take up the moment, right? To understand exactly what's at stake. And so I think there's a vast gulf, frankly, between fighting fire with fire and an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. So I wanted to answer that question from that place. Okay. All right. There will be a bonus broadcast today at 3:30 p.m. for all of our Patreon subscribers. If you would like to get in on that bonus broadcast, where you can literally ask me anything except, like, super personal stuff, you can head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and subscribe for as little as $5 a month. We also have a very big announcement coming sometime, I think, in the next week about additional features that are being added to our Patreon. I signaled this last week a little bit. So there's some really exciting stuff happening behind the scenes. Stay tuned for that. But of course, our Patreon people will be the first people to know about it. So if you want to know some other really cool things that are coming from us, you should head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and subscribe. And please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Don't forget to give us the thumbs up, like this broadcast, hit that bell notification, share this broadcast with anyone who might like it. And lastly, if you really want to make a difference right now and you're not sure where to get started, download our free guide, which is already in the show notes, and I will drop into the comments about how to make a difference right now, particularly without burning out. All right. Lots of love, everybody. I will see our Patreon subscribers in a few hours. And I wish you all a great weekend. All right. I'll be back here live on Tuesday. There will be an educational video available on Monday at noon. All right, everybody. Bye.